What if the most dangerous-looking man who ever walked into your diner turned out to be the one person who needed kindness most? Frank Delano hadn't been called by his real name in 30 years. To most folks in Newark, he was just the Wolf, a man whose reputation walked through the door before he did. At 72, his hands still bore the scars of a life he'd spent decades trying to forget. On a bitter November evening, he pushed open the glass door of Rosie's diner, the little bell chiming above his head like a judgment. The usual hush fell over the room. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. But there, behind the counter, a young waitress named Marie looked up and smiled at him like he was just another customer needing a hot meal and a kind word. That smile would change everything. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Marie Foster had been working at Rosie's diner for 6 months, ever since she'd moved to Newark to help her grandmother with medical bills. At 28, she'd learned that everyone had a story, and most people just wanted someone to listen without judging. She'd noticed Frank the moment he walked in, not because of the whispers that followed him, but because of something in his eyes. Beneath that hard exterior, she saw loneliness that reminded her of her own grandfather. Frank settled into the corner booth, the same spot he'd claimed every Thursday evening for the past year. It gave him a clear view of the door and kept his back to the wall. Old habits died hard. He didn't need to look at the menu. Marie approached with a pot of coffee, her smile genuine and unforced. "Evening, sir. Coffee to start?" Her voice carried a soft southern accent that reminded him of simpler times. "Please," Frank said, his voice rougher than he intended. Years of giving orders and making threats had left their mark on even his simplest words. Marie poured the coffee with steady hands, not a tremor of fear. She pulled out her notepad. "The meatloaf's really good tonight. My grandmother's recipe. Reminds me of Sunday dinners back home." Frank found himself nodding. "I'll take that. And mashed potatoes. Real ones. Not that instant stuff." The corner of Marie's mouth lifted. "We don't do instant anything here, sir. This is the real deal." As she walked away, Frank noticed she didn't rush like the other waitresses did when they served him. She moved with purpose but without fear, and that small difference settled something restless in his chest. The diner slowly came back to life around him. An elderly couple 2 booths over resumed their conversation. A trucker at the counter laughed at something on his phone, but Frank remained an island, separated by years of choices that couldn't be undone. He'd been trying to live quietly since his release from prison 5 years ago. He paid his debts, kept his head down, and tried to make peace with a past that followed him like a shadow. Marie returned with his meal, steam rising from the plate in gentle wisps. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, setting down the silverware wrapped in a clean napkin. Frank shook his head, but then surprised himself by asking, "You new to Newark?" She nodded, leaning slightly against the booth divider in that casual way young people had when they weren't afraid. 6 months now. Came up from Georgia to help my grandmother. She raised me after my parents died." Something in Frank's chest tightened. "That's good of you. Not many young people stick around for family anymore." Marie's eyes showed a flash of something deeper. Maybe grief, maybe determination. Family's all we really have at the end of the day, isn't it? Before Frank could respond, she was called away to another table, leaving him with his meal and thoughts that suddenly felt heavier than they had in years. The meatloaf was perfect, seasoned just right with that hint of Worcestershire sauce his mother used to use. Frank ate slowly, savoring each bite not just for the taste but for the memories it stirred. For a few minutes, he wasn't the wolf. He was just Frank Delano, a kid from Brooklyn who'd loved his mother's cooking and dreamed of becoming a mechanic. As the evening wore on and the diner emptied, Frank found himself lingering over his second cup of coffee. Through the window, he could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, dancing in the streetlight's glow. Winter always made him think of his daughter. She'd be 43 now, living somewhere in California with a family he'd never met. The restraining order she'd filed 20 years ago still stung like a fresh wound. Marie appeared at his table, setting down a slice of apple pie he hadn't ordered. "On the house," she said quietly. "You looked like you could use something sweet." Frank's throat tightened. It had been so long since anyone had offered him kindness without expecting something in return. "I didn't order this," he managed to say. Marie's smile was gentle, understanding. I know, but sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't ask for. She walked away before he could protest, leaving him staring at the pie with its perfect golden crust and cinnamon sugar crystals catching the light. Frank picked up his fork with hands that suddenly felt too heavy. The first bite released the scent of autumn and home and everything good he'd lost along the way. When he finished, he sat back against the worn vinyl booth and closed his eyes for just a moment, letting himself remember what it felt like to be human. Over the next 3 weeks, Thursday evenings became sacred to Frank. He'd arrive at exactly 6:30, take his corner booth, and Marie would bring him coffee without asking. They'd talk in small bursts between her serving other customers, about the weather, about old movies, about nothing and everything. Frank found himself looking forward to those conversations more than he cared to admit. One Thursday, Frank arrived to find Marie's smile missing. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands shook slightly as she poured his coffee. "You all right?" he asked, surprising himself with the concern in his voice. Marie tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. "Just one of those days. My grandmother needs surgery. The insurance won't cover all of it." She shook her head quickly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't burden you with this." Frank watched her walk away, something stirring in his chest that felt almost like purpose. He knew what it was like to be desperate, to watch someone you loved slip away because you couldn't save them. His own mother had died while he was in prison, surrounded by strangers instead of her son. That regret had carved a permanent hollow in his heart. The next Thursday, Frank noticed 2 men at the counter who didn't belong. They had that particular stillness that came from years of watching, waiting, ready for violence. He recognized one of them. Tommy, the wrench, Moretti, someone from his old life who'd never learned when to let the past stay buried. Tommy's eyes found Frank's in the mirror behind the counter, and a slow smile spread across his face. Marie appeared at Frank's booth, her notepad ready, but Frank's attention was locked on the 2 men. "Same as usual?" she asked, and the normalcy of her voice pulled him back. He forced himself to look at her, to see the simple kindness in her face. "Yeah, sweetheart. Same as usual." As Marie turned to leave, Tommy stood and intercepted her path. Frank's muscles tensed, his body remembering old patterns of protection and violence. "Excuse me, miss," Tommy said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "I'm looking for an old friend. Big guy, corner booth, probably acting like he's better than everyone else now." Marie's expression remained polite but distant. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what you mean. Would you like to order something?" Tommy leaned closer, and Frank could see Marie's shoulders stiffen. "See, that's Frank Delano over there. The wolf. Did he tell you what he used to do? Did he tell you about the people who got hurt when he—" "That's enough." Frank's voice cut through the diner like a blade. He stood slowly, his full height and presence filling the space. The other diners had gone quiet again, that familiar tension returning. Tommy grinned, having gotten the reaction he wanted. "There he is. The wolf himself. Thought you could just walk away from everything? Thought you could pretend to be some respectable old man?" Marie stepped back, her eyes moving between the 2 men. For the first time since Frank had met her, he saw uncertainty in her face. Doubt. Fear. It was a look he'd seen too many times before, and it cut deeper than any of Tommy's words. "Frank?" Her voice was small, questioning. The way she said his name, like she wasn't sure who he was anymore, made something crack inside his chest. "Go on," Tommy continued, addressing Marie now. "Ask him about the gambling dens, the loan sharking. Ask him about the people who couldn't pay and what happened to them. Ask him about—" "I said that's enough." Frank moved forward, and decades of command made Tommy take an instinctive step back despite his bravado. "Whatever you want with me, we take it outside. You leave her out of this." But the damage was done. Frank could see it in Marie's eyes, the way she was reassessing everything, every conversation they'd had. The kindness in her expression was being replaced by wariness, by the realization that the man she'd been serving pie to had a past soaked in violence and fear. Tommy laughed, satisfied. "Just thought she should know who she's been so friendly with." "Come on, Frankie. Let's take a walk down memory lane." Frank's hands clenched into fists, but he forced them open. He'd spent 5 years learning to walk away, to choose peace over pride. He reached for his wallet, pulled out 3 20s, and laid them on the table. Far more than his meal cost. He looked at Marie one last time, seeing the questions and fear in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words inadequate for everything he wanted to say. As he walked toward the door, following Tommy outside, he heard Marie's soft voice behind him. "Frank, wait!" But he didn't wait. He couldn't. Because how could he explain that everything Tommy said was true? That the man she'd shown kindness to had done terrible things, hurt innocent people, destroyed families? If this moment touched your heart, if you've ever wished you could rewrite your past or wondered if redemption is possible, please give this video a thumbs up. Some stories need to be told. The cold November air hit Frank like a slap as the diner door closed behind him. Outside, under the flickering streetlight, Tommy lit a cigarette and studied Frank with calculating eyes. "You've gone soft, old man. Time was, you would have put me through that window for disrespecting you." Frank kept his voice level, controlled. "What do you want, Tommy?" The younger man took a drag, blowing smoke into the cold air. "Word is you're sitting on something. Money from the old days. I got people who want their share." Frank almost laughed at the absurdity. "There's nothing left, Tommy. I lost everything. My family, my respect, 20 years of my life. Whatever you think I have, you're wrong." But Tommy wasn't listening. He never had been. "You got 1 week to come up with 50 grand. Otherwise, people start getting hurt. Maybe that pretty waitress with the nice smile. Maybe her sick grandmother." The rage that flooded through Frank was familiar, comfortable, like slipping into an old coat. For one dangerous moment, he was back in his 30s, when problems were solved with fear and violence. His hands moved before his brain could stop them, grabbing Tommy's collar and slamming him against the brick wall. "You threaten her again and I'll—" He stopped, breathing hard, seeing his reflection in Tommy's triumphant eyes. This was what Tommy wanted, to pull him back into the darkness, to prove that Frank Delano could never really change. Frank released him and stepped back, his heart pounding. "I'm not that man anymore." Tommy straightened his jacket, that smug smile still in place. "Sure you're not. 1 week, Frankie. Clock's ticking." He walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving Frank alone with his demons and the certain knowledge that the past he'd been running from had finally caught up. Frank stood there for a long time, watching snowflakes dissolve on the warm pavement. Through the diner window he could see Marie clearing tables, her movements mechanical now instead of graceful. He'd brought his poison into her life, contaminated the one place where he'd felt almost clean. The right thing to do was walk away, never come back, let her forget he existed. But Tommy's threat echoed in his mind. $50,000, money he didn't have and couldn't get. And if he didn't pay, Marie would become a target simply because she'd been kind to him. Frank had made many mistakes in his life, hurt many people, but he'd never forgive himself if something happened to her because of him. He walked back into the diner. The few remaining customers looked up nervously. Marie was at the register, her back to him. "Marie." She turned slowly, and Frank could see she'd been crying. The sight of her tears, caused by him, was worse than any prison sentence he'd served. "I need to explain," he started, but she held up her hand. "The customers," she said quietly, gesturing to the watchful faces around them. "After closing?" Frank nodded and returned to his booth. The next hour was the longest of his life. Customers left one by one until only he and Marie remained. She locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and sat across from him in the booth. This close, Frank could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of responsibility she carried. "Is it true?" she asked. "What that man said about you?" Frank had spent years crafting excuses, justifications for the things he'd done. But sitting across from Marie, he found he couldn't lie. "Yes, all of it. I ran a crew in North Jersey for 20 years. I hurt people, Marie. I destroyed lives. I went to prison for it. And even after 20 years inside, I know I didn't pay back what I took from this world." Marie's hands were clasped on the table, her knuckles white. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have given me the time of day if you'd known?" Frank asked. Would you have smiled at me, brought me pie, talked to me like I was human? The question hung between them, heavy with truth. Have you ever hidden parts of your past from someone because you were afraid they'd see you differently? Have you ever wanted a fresh start so badly you'd do anything for it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Marie was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. My father was an alcoholic. He hurt my mother, hurt me. I spent my childhood afraid of him. Frank's heart sank, understanding where this was going, but Marie continued. My grandmother taught me that people can change, that who we were doesn't have to be who we are. But Frank, you have to be honest. You have to let people decide if they want to take that chance on you. Her eyes met his, clear and direct. So I'm asking you now, straight out, is that man, the one from before, still inside you? Frank sat back, the weight of Marie's question pressing down on him like physical force. Was the old Frank still there? He'd asked himself that question 1,000 times in the 5 years since his release. Every day, he admitted, his voice raw with honesty. Every single day I wake up and have to choose not to be that man. Some days it's harder than others. Today, outside when he threatened you, his hands clenched on the table. For a second I wanted to hurt him, really hurt him, and that terrifies me. Marie listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. But I didn't, Frank continued. I walked away, because I've learned that violence doesn't solve anything. It just creates more pain, more victims, more people who have to live with the consequences. He leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. Marie, I can't undo what I did. Those people I hurt, they're going to carry that forever. But I can try to be better, to maybe help more than I harmed. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But it's all I've got. The silence stretched between them. Through the window, snow was falling harder now, covering the streets in white. Finally, Marie spoke. That man said you have a week. What did he mean? Frank's jaw tightened. He didn't want to drag her further into his mess, but she deserved the truth. He wants $50,000. Money he thinks I have hidden from the old days. I don't. But he won't believe that. And he said if I don't pay... He couldn't finish the sentence. He'll hurt me. Marie's voice was calm, stating a fact rather than expressing fear. My grandmother. Frank nodded miserably. Which is why I'm going to fix this. Tomorrow I'll find Tommy and what? Marie interrupted. Go back to being the man you were? Solve this problem the old way? I don't know. Frank's voice cracked with frustration and fear. I don't know how to fix this without being him again. That's the only way I know how to protect people. Marie reached across the table and did something that shocked him to his core. She placed her hand over his scarred, weathered one. The simple touch of human connection, freely given, nearly broke him. There's always another way, she said softly. My grandmother has a saying, the strongest thing a man can do is ask for help. Frank shook his head. I can't involve anyone else in this. I won't put more people in danger. You already did when you walked into this diner, Marie pointed out, but her voice wasn't accusing. You got involved in my life when you started caring about whether I had a good day. When you noticed I was upset about my grandmother. That's what people do, Frank. They get tangled up in each other's lives. That's what makes us human. Frank felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. Hope, fragile and dangerous. What are you suggesting? Marie pulled her hand back and stood up, moving to the counter. She returned with a phone. We call the police. We report the threat. Let the law handle this. The law? Frank's laugh was bitter. Marie, I spent 20 years on the wrong side of the law. The cops aren't going to help me. Maybe not you, Marie said, her voice gaining strength. But they'll help me. They'll help my grandmother. We file a report, we document everything. If Tommy comes near us, he'll be the one going to prison. She unlocked her phone and started dialing. Wait, Frank grabbed her wrist gently. You don't understand what you're getting into. Tommy's connected. He has friends, people who... And you have me, Marie said simply. You have a witness who saw him threaten us tonight. You have security cameras in this diner that recorded everything. She gestured to the small camera above the register that Frank had never noticed. You have a choice, Frank. You can handle this the old way and become the man you're trying not to be. Or you can trust that maybe, just maybe, there's a different path. Frank looked at this young woman who should have run from him, who had every reason to fear him, and saw instead someone offering him something he'd never had before, a chance at redemption that didn't require him to save himself alone. If I do this, he said slowly, if I go to the police, Tommy might escalate. He might, Marie agreed. Or he might back down when he realizes he can't intimidate you anymore. Either way, you'll be making the right choice. Isn't that what matters? Frank thought about his daughter in California, the grandchildren he'd never met. He thought about all the years he'd spent behind bars, all the regret he carried. And he thought about this moment, this choice, this chance to prove that Frank Delano could be more than the sum of his worst decisions. Okay, he whispered. Okay, let's call them. If this story has moved, if you believe in second chances and the power of choosing, right, even when it's hard, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of redemption and hope. Your support means the world. Marie dialed 911, and as she spoke calmly to the dispatcher, Frank felt something shift inside him, like a door he'd kept locked finally swinging open to let in the light. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Frank told them everything, about Tommy, the threats, his own past. The officers, one older veteran named Rodriguez and a younger woman named Chen, listened without judgment. Rodriguez even nodded slowly when Frank explained his history. I remember the Delano case, he said. You did your time. That matters. They took statements, collected the security footage, and promised to pick up Tommy for questioning. We'll have a patrol car swing by here regularly, Officer Chen added, looking at Marie. And here's my direct number if anything else happens. After they left, Frank and Marie sat in the quiet diner, exhausted but relieved. The weight that had been crushing Frank's chest felt lighter somehow. I never thought I'd willingly talk to cops, he admitted with a weak smile. Marie returned it. I never thought I'd be friends with someone called the Wolf. The use of past tense on called wasn't lost on Frank. She was separating him from his old identity, giving him permission to be someone new. Over the next few days, the police arrested Tommy and two of his associates on multiple charges including extortion and threatening violence. Frank learned through Rodriguez that Tommy had been running similar schemes across North Jersey, targeting other former criminals who were trying to go straight. With Frank's testimony and the security footage, the district attorney built a solid case. For the first time in his life, Frank was on the right side of the law. Thursday evening came again, and Frank found himself at the diner's door, uncertain. Would Marie still want him there? Had he contaminated her safe space too much? He pushed open the door, and the familiar bell chimed. Marie looked up from the counter and smiled, not the polite smile she gave customers, but a genuine, warm smile of friendship. Coffee? She asked. Please, Frank said, settling into his corner booth, feeling something in his chest unknot. As she poured his coffee, Marie set down an envelope. What's this? Frank asked. Open it, she said simply. Inside was a photograph of an elderly woman in a hospital bed, smiling despite the tubes and monitors around her. My grandmother. Her surgery went well. She's going to be okay. Frank felt his throat tighten. That's wonderful, Marie. I'm so glad. There's more, Marie said, sitting across from him. The story about Tommy, about everything that happened, it got some attention. A local charity that helps families with medical bills reached out. They're covering what my insurance won't. She reached across and squeezed his hand. Sometimes when we do the right thing, Frank, good things follow. Not always, not guaranteed, but sometimes. Frank nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd spent so many years believing he was beyond redemption, that his past would always define him. But here was evidence that change was possible, that choosing right could lead somewhere better. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Frank started volunteering at a community center, using his skills to teach young men about the consequences of violence, about choosing a different path than he had. He reconnected with his sister in Florida, a painful conversation that ended with tentative forgiveness and an invitation to visit. One Thursday evening, 2 months after the confrontation with Tommy, Frank arrived at the diner to find Marie unusually excited. I have something to show you, she said, pulling out her phone. On the screen was an email. Frank's eyes widened as he read it. It was from his daughter in California. Marie had found her through social media and sent her a message. Not revealing Frank's location, but letting her know that her father was trying to make amends. That he'd changed. "I know this is overstepping," Marie said quickly, seeing Frank's shocked expression. "But I thought maybe if you wanted—" "She wants to talk?" Frank interrupted, his voice breaking. Marie nodded. "She says she's willing to have a phone call. That's all. Just a conversation. No promises beyond that." Frank's hands trembled as he held the phone, looking at his daughter's email address. After 20 years of silence, of believing that bridge was permanently burned, here was a chance. "I don't know what to say to her," he admitted. "Start with 'I'm sorry,'" Marie suggested gently. "Then listen. That's all any of us can do, Frank. Say we're sorry and try to do better." That night, after the diner closed, Frank made the call. His daughter, Linda, answered after 4 rings. Her voice was cautious, guarded, but she answered. They talked for 30 minutes. Awkward, painful, honest conversation between 2 people separated by years of hurt. By the end, they agreed to another call in 2 weeks. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As Frank walked home through the snow, he realized that for the first time in 50 years, he felt at peace. Not because his past was erased, it never would be, but because he was finally moving forward instead of just existing. The wolf was still part of him, would always be part of him, but Frank Delano was more than his worst chapter. He was also this moment, this choice, this step toward something better. Marie had taught him that redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction. You didn't arrive at being redeemed. You kept choosing it, over and over, one day at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story of second chances and the power of kindness, please remember to like this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts about forgiveness and change, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Thank you for joining Frank's journey tonight. May you always find the courage to choose the light, even when the darkness feels familiar. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.